I want to begin by thanking Paula for making me sound so competent in that introduction, because in the past 48 hours I've learned there are 5 words in the English language that I am now terrified of hearing, and they are, do you have your passport? It is a true fact that I set out very early to join you here yesterday. By very early, it was 5:30 in the morning, and I had everything together. And then the driver who had come to drive me to the airport said those 5 words, and I didn't. So a mad dash into Manhattan ensued, but here I am. I'm so really delighted. I was so excited about joining you, even more excited because now I am literally joining your ranks, teaching journalism and writing, and I'm so excited about that. But very excited that I actually made it here and feel very privileged to share the podium with the winners of the Aejmc Awards, who all are so accomplished and wonderful. And I am going to try to use the few minutes I have to give my keynote to be really as candid with you as possible about what I see as the great promise of the 24/7 news cycle that we all engage with, and the promise of social media as a way to spread journalism and make the stories that we all care about so much have resonance in our society, but also, frankly, some of the dangers too. And Paula mentioned to you NYT Now, and I'm going to begin just with a little bit of background on that, because it's the last big project that I worked on as executive editor of the Times, and something that I think really represents a successful strategy for how to compete in the fire hose of a media environment that we all live in now. And basically what NYT Now is, it's a custom designed mobile news product. The Atlantic magazine, which is one of several journalism criticism sites that celebrated its debut, said that NYT Now harks back to the strategy of building and catering to an engaged audience of repeat readers. Call it antiviral. Search engine optimization and big social sharing networks would actually seem to fight this strategy and breed what I've come to call a kind of digital homelessness and journalistic promiscuity, where the audience, kind of herd-like, moves from site to site, snacking on shareable viral stories. The strategy behind NYT Now was to recognize that keeping up with the news is exhausting and daunting, and that the best way to do it isn't the endless Facebook or Twitter feeds. It's a single updated news package designed for mobile and tailored to readers who want the quick summarized basics of the New York Times news report in a smart but somewhat chattier, friendlier voice. NYT Now has a sleek, scrollable design. It's perfect for iPhones. It boils down New York Times stories into very easily digested bullets for those people who are on the go or too busy to read full text, but it's also very easy to flip to the full text of stories to get all of the analysis and deep reporting that goes into those stories. Times editors also curate the rest of the web for the best and most interesting news articles, somehow avoiding the allure of the Kardashians. It's possible, it is. NYT Now is a journalistic success story. It's been downloaded by tens of thousands of readers. It's unclear whether, priced at $8 a month, it's a business success. $8 a month is less than the $15 a month that it costs all of you to get a monthly digital subscription to the Times. So it's less expensive, but it's unclear yet whether that many people will fork over $8 for this other news app. But I think it's off to a promising start. I know I'm addicted to it as I move through my day because it offers the authority of the Times without dumbing down a news report that's designed for mobile first. And I think that that's the model of how traditional news companies should adapt to the 24/7 news cycle and to current digital realities. The idea is to reach readers where they are, and that's increasingly, obviously, on their smartphones. But it's not to throw the values of quality reporting, smart analysis, intelligent editing, and elegant presentation out the window. Audience engagement is one of the great buzz phrases of our time. And it's true that readers no longer come to a story because an editor at the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post hits the publish button. Social media has changed the way that news spreads. But what matters most is still the substance and authority of the news being reported, not how it is amplified. Articles need to be promoted on social media to attract the audiences they deserve, that's for sure. But the stories have to be genuinely worthy of attracting a big readership. Because NYT Now is built on the unique quality of New York Times journalism, I predict it's going to succeed. Not because it caters to the platform, mobile, or promotes itself on social platforms to goose its audience. It's become fashionable for a journalist like me who cut her teeth in the best print newsrooms like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times to bemoan the bad influence that social platforms have had on the news. But the top story on Twitter in 2013 wasn't Miley Cyrus. She was actually number 3. It was the Boston Marathon bombing, a serious news story. And the most viral story of 2013 wasn't one of BuzzFeed's adorable puppy listicles. It was a fascinating New York Times interactive feature figuring out regional accent patterns called How Y'all Use and You Guys Talk. Although here in Montreal, it would be Comment parlez-vous en Montreal? Or something like that. Let's just admit it, entertainment values suffused news long before Mark Zuckerberg was even born. People magazine always swamped time on the newsstand. In many ways, Facebook and Twitter have strengthened the news and made the fierce urgency of now more compelling than ever. My first lesson in how Facebook could literally power a news story came in 2011 during Hurricane Irene, which those of you who reside on the East Coast will surely remember. I was worried to death that with no computers or television, how would the Times actually cover this story in real time? And one of the Times' digital editors helped me develop an interactive addition to our news report called the Hurricane Tracker that used the Times' Facebook page and other social platforms to publish crucial news about the storm as it roared across the New York areas. Readers' iPhone pictures augmented the reporting of Times journalists and photographers. In the digital present, everyone can be a publisher. Yesterday, when I saw news of a terrible accident of a bus in Times Square, where did I go first? Of course, to Twitter. And already there were at least 10 or a dozen really good photographs that people had just tweeted. So that's how I got up to speed on that story. That's a democratizing force in journalism. But for sure, this ability carries risks too. The manic competition to file a story can breed careless, error-prone reporting, or not give correspondents or photojournalists the time they need to really think through their story, or enough time to provide readers with a deeply reported, well-presented story. I work very, very closely, because I have a legal reporting background, with two successive Supreme Court correspondents for the New York Times. And they both worried to death, and rightfully so, that the pressure to report end-of-term decisions as they were handed down didn't leave them with the time they needed to really distill those decisions. And I think it's fine, as the Times sometimes does, with my encouragement when I was executive editor, to just post on the website, we're reporting this story and we'll soon have something up, to signal to readers both that the Times recognizes and knows that competitors have stories up, but that the subject needs further fact-finding and analysis. Readers are often smarter than we give them credit for. I think they honor accuracy more than instant gratification. They can handle long stories if they're well reported and offer something that is genuinely unique. The Times recently ran a story about a campus assault that took up 3 full pages in the A section on a Sunday. And it was tremendously well read online, because it was both informative and an amazingly gripping narrative. I read it on my iPhone and had no problem getting through it. These stories can take months to report and edit, but they are what distinguishes the journalism in quality newspapers like the Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and others. I'd like to dwell at some length on 2 areas of journalism that have been profoundly affected by the rise of social platforms: international and political coverage. Candidly, again, the effects have been both healthy and disturbing. For most of our history, war has been witnessed in the rearview mirror. Think back to Civil War times. That's a long time ago indeed, but it took weeks, sometimes even months, for Matthew Brady's photographs or eyewitness accounts of battles to reach readers back in the 1860s. Vietnam was the first war to reach Americans in their living rooms. And on TV, there began to be live coverage during the first Gulf War. That all seems so quaint in a world where both journalists and citizens are uploading instant images of war's ravages in Gaza, or images of the bloody aftermath of the downing of the plane in Ukraine. Journalists begin writing about what they are seeing on Twitter at the instant they witness events. Scenes of disaster and chaos are everywhere. This can inform, but it can also plainly just shock and overwhelm. Some correspondents, like the CNN reporter who tweeted about being harassed by Israeli soldiers and called them scum, have run into trouble with Twitter as their instant bugle. Others have done incredibly inspiring things. Tyler Hicks, a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer for the Times, witnessed those 4 small Palestinian boys who were playing 1 minute and killed the next. He tweeted out the news, posted hard-to-look-at photographs almost instantaneously, and then wrote very quickly a memorable piece about what it was like for him to be there and bear witness. Matthew Arnold, the poet and critic, once called journalism, quote, literature in a hurry, unquote. Tyler was creating a valuable first draft of history in a big hurry. The dark side of social platforms has also been on display in the Gaza conflict. They give propaganda, which has always played a role in modern warfare, a megaphone. Facebook and Twitter can't begin to monitor the hate-filled posts that have swamped both sides of the conflict. Extremists have flocked to hashtag Gaza under attack and hashtag Israel under fire. The Israeli Defense Ministry now has a 40-person public affairs department that post battle footage on social platforms and YouTube. Social media has, as Jody Rudoran, an American Middle East correspondent, recently observed, put propaganda on steroids. Google yesterday, I was working out at the gym here at the Sheraton watching CNN, and they had a story that Google couldn't keep up with the angry demands of people, that they pulled down these Android apps that were literally games that people could play pretending that they were either attacking the Palestinians or the Israelis. It's really pretty grotesque what's out there right now. In the US, we're approaching the 2016 election, and political coverage is now dominated by what I call scooplets, saucy bits of gossip that highlight campaign conflicts or gaffes, without the substance of issues or stories that really reflect how politics affects real people's lives. The campaign fire hose is always on. Twitter is how political news is started and amplified. It's good and healthy that Facebook co-sponsored the GOP debates in 2012, and that first debate between President Obama and Mitt Romney actually set a record for tweets, 1.1 million. You can now watch candidate ads for yourself and test them for accuracy on YouTube or Vimeo. In 2000, the fact that candidates even had websites was revolutionary. But the fire hose leaves me pining for the deep reporting of a Theodore H. White. It's rare to find history or context in political stories, or any real understanding of how the candidates really exist as people. The kinds of things I pine for are the texture. I've had more time on my hands to do a little bit of rereading of books that I adore. And one of the books I love about politics is Teddy White's Making of the President 1960. And just the quality of the anecdotes in that book just knocked me out reading the book again. There's the story of how Hubert Humphrey, who was just struggling for survival in the West Virginia primary, which he lost to John F. Kennedy, is being told by his campaign manager that he won't have a prayer if he can't get some TV ads up. And he takes out the family checkbook and actually writes a personal check. John F. Kennedy, it's amazing to think he had the equanimity to actually head to bed on election night before he was certain he had beat Richard Nixon. But he wanted a sandwich before he went to bed, so he goes to the fridge in Hyannisport, gets the makings of a sandwich, and then gets completely irritated because there's no milk in the house. That is just the kind of revealing detail that I think readers still eat up. And I worry that reporters either don't get the access to the candidates or they just don't have the reporting time to tell those kinds of stories anymore. I prefer for political reporters to listen and report what the candidates are actually talking about, rather than being so determined to break a little scooplet that may drive the media conversation of the day, only to be forgotten the next. In 2013, the average time spent on the internet was 5 hours. That's up from only 3 hours in 2010. So the rate at which people are absorbing everything and really reading everything that they want to get their hands on online is growing very quickly. And is it good or bad? It's going to take us a very long time to know the real effects on reading habits and our brains that all that scanning and scrolling and searching for keywords is going to have. A piece I read recently called for a movement called slow reading, kind of like slow cooking. I think there's something to this. You know, I'm going to be joining your ranks, and I feel so privileged to be doing that this fall, teaching a journalism writing course at Harvard. and I'm assigning some of my favorite long pieces of narrative nonfiction, tracing the arc of journalism from profiles in the 1960s by Gay Talese to Jane Mayer's amazing investigative pieces in The New Yorker, to the multimedia exquisite feature story Snowfall that Paula referred to in her introduction. We're going to dissect these stories, examine their structure, study the basics of reporting and sourcing, and how to build narrative tension into stories. I want my students to savor this journalism and to learn from it in order to improve their own writing. And I've also returned to reporting and writing myself, which is a little daunting, but very exciting too. Even in the 24/7, 140-character world of journalism, my belief in a well-told, deeply reported story has never wavered. A great story always finds its audience. Thanks, and I'm eager to take some questions from you.
And I suspect that many of you remember this because when she was appointed executive editor of the New York Times and she was interviewed, and we used this quote in our classes, that in terms of being a editor, and we call gatekeeper, using essentially some of the theories that we talk about, that you really said that you didn't see a difference being a woman in terms of being the gatekeeper, the chief gatekeeper of the New York Times. And so my question is, what would you say today? Having had that experience as the executive editor of the New York Times, would you still say that there's no difference when it's a woman versus a man?
Well, I did not think in terms of the substance of the journalism or story selection, which is more in keeping with the gatekeeper role, that there was a difference. I have always, since I started out in journalism, I've been attracted, almost obsessed with what I call getting the story behind the story. I never have been really that consumed with just spot news developments. Obviously, you know, I'm a news hound of sorts, but the stories that really get my juices flowing are, why did something happen? Who were the characters who were driving the action in a story? What were their motives? You know, that kind of fly on the wall detail that I was just talking about Teddy White being able to get. And I don't think that drive to get that level of deep reporting is a gender-focused kind of preference. That just has always been what I find interesting and fascinating as either an editor or a reader, and that's in general what I push journalists who work with me to go for.
Have a question?
Hi, I'm Susan Jacobson from Florida International University in Miami. I have a question. So, since the publication of Snowfall, there have been many wonderful publications very similar to that popping up in mainstream media and even some blogs. Obviously, it takes a lot of in-depth reporting.
It takes resources.
It takes resources and team. If you could comment a little bit on sort of like the future of this particular form in terms of its financial viability, like what might happen to make it more accessible, I would greatly appreciate it.
I think in some ways that what was so revolutionary about Snowfall and what is important about stories that try to accomplish much of what Snowfall did, the heart of the matter is really creating with multimedia what I call an organic reading experience. I think just adding different multimedia components as sort of extras, quote unquote, video or links to documents or motion graphics, any of that, it's most powerful if in the presentation it's included to deepen or broaden the actual storytelling. It, I think, can become distracting and somewhat pointless if all it does is echo the words in some way. So I think the most important thing is for the journalists working on these projects, because they're team efforts, they have to be, is for the journalists who have specialties in different areas of multimedia, who work on the stories, to really think through how is their specialty going to deepen the storytelling and be part of an organic whole, so that the story is actually a story, not just a jerry-rigged multimedia extravaganza. So that is the most important thing. I think you can outsource some of this so that, I don't think you have to be a newsroom that has the staff or the resources of a New York Times in order to do these kinds of stories. But it certainly helps to have staff and resources. But I think the time and the clarity of thought and really, Snowfall always, just like any other all-print story, it had an inspirational editor who was sort of the orchestra leader, and I think, that's another universal that successful multimedia journalism usually has.
Hi, my name is Camille Reyes. I'm a PhD candidate at Rutgers University. Thank you for your talk. As you say, it is now necessary to promote journalism via social media. I'm wondering, though, who you think should be doing that promotion? Should it be
That's a great
relations
question.
professionals, the journalists themselves?
Right. It's a very interesting question. If social media is, as I believe it should be, an extension of publishing. It isn't separate from writing or hitting the button that makes it appear on a website or on an app. I believe that the use of social media to promote and get the word out about stories is an extension of publishing. Now, publishing has always involved both, at least where I've worked, the news side and the business side. And interestingly, at the Times, in the beginning, actually the marketing department did most of the marketing department sort of controlled the Facebook, and then Twitter came later, the Times' Twitter feed. And more recently, those functions have been brought, into the newsroom, not to exclude the marketing people, but so that, again, I'll use the word organic again. So that's an organic part of the substance of the journalism, which I think is where it belongs.
I'm Barbara Sullivan from Stony Brook University. And I'm wondering, 50 years after the Civil Rights Act and more than 40 years after second wave feminism, why is it so hard for minorities and women to get, let alone keep, top jobs in news organizations?
Where are my friends from Iowa when I need them? I'm kidding. It is really hard, and I was tremendously inspired listening to our award winner talk about making diversity really part and parcel of the culture, every part of the culture out in Iowa. And I think that is key to changing what, I'm not going to stand here and be Panglossian or be a Pollyanna. The numbers stink by and large. They just do. And, in some ways, as journalism schools and your ranks, certainly in terms of gender, have diversified. It's true that when you look at the top of journalism, it is kind of a wasteland when it comes to diversity. And right now, on TV, which for many Americans is still the most visible news medium, we don't, there aren't any women anchors right now. There are some great female correspondents, but, Diane Sawyer stepped down, Barbara Walters just retired, Katie, she was doing, a talk show, not necessarily a news show, but that show was canceled. And, there are not that many, women top editors of either large newspapers or magazines. I tried both during my 8 years as managing editor at the Times and certainly as executive editor, where the buck stopped with me, to create a culture of diversity for the first time in the Times history. We were half the sky of the masthead at the New York Times, which the masthead is the most senior editors in the newsroom, were half women, and it was becoming more diverse in other ways too. And I believe that will continue at the Times, certainly. There are many women and journalists of color who have some of the best jobs in that newsroom. And so I feel good about the trends there, but overall there's, a lot of room for improvement. But I do think that instead of paying lip service to diversity or bemoaning the numbers, that we should do as our friends in Iowa do, which is just walk the walk and actually make it part of the culture of the workplace.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Jason Shepard. I'm a journalism professor in the Department of Communications at Cal State Fullerton. My question is, I was wondering if you could talk a little about, or give us some insights into the discussions and thinking while you were editor at the Times in stories involving disclosure of national security secrets, and in particular your thoughts about the criticism of the Times by Edward Snowden about why he didn't use the Times to disclose the information that he gave to other journalists.
Happy to talk about that. To provide some context, sort of towards the end of my tenure as executive editor, I was in a somewhat spirited conversation with the Obama White House over the fact that I have made public statements and have continued to make them, and I'll make it here too, that the Obama White House is the most secretive White House that I have dealt with. They have initiated 8 criminal leak investigations. Those are prosecutions of whistleblowers who have provided information to journalists, including some at the New York Times, about classified intelligence programs and national security secrets. But in all of these cases, I believe these stories were vital to publish, very much in the public interest. a great editor, Bob Kaiser, who was managing editor of the Washington Post, said, right, a few years after 9/11, he explained the justification for publishing stories about classified intelligence programs, even when the White House makes requests that either the Post or the New York Times or a broadcast network not go with these stories. He said, if there's a war on terror being waged in the name of the American public, isn't it really important for the public to know the dimensions of that war and what it involves? And I believe the answer is absolutely yes. In the case of Snowden not bringing his material to the Times, he said the reason he didn't want to go to the Times is because back in 2004, when Jim Risen, who, by the way, is one of the journalists who has been embroiled in one of these leak cases, and he is under subpoena right now and has said that he would rather go to jail than be forced to name his source in one of these trials. Jim and a colleague, Eric Lischblau, have uncovered the NSA's warrantless eavesdropping program, and the Bush administration and the Bush White House, Bill Keller was then the executive editor, asked him and the Washington bureau chief that the Times not publish that story because they said it was the crown jewel in our counterterrorism program and that lives would be lost if we published it. Quietly, the story was held for a year. Jim and Eric Lischblau continued to report on it, and what changed the Times' view about publishing was just that the warrantless eavesdropping was clearly illegal, and as evidence of that accumulated, the compellingness of the story became clear and it was published. But Snowden was angry, and I think his anger was legitimate that the Times held the story for so long.
One more. You have one more question?
Fantastic, everyone wants to. I'm an adjunct faculty member at Collins University, teaching broadcast news, and I'm also a full-time broadcast journalist in Virginia. My question is, I find, when I was in J school, it was instilled in me that be unbiased, be fair, keep your political beliefs to yourself. Your viewers should have no idea how you're going to vote, what you think about divisive issues. Do you think, and are you afraid that the way at least with network news and cable news outlets have evolved over the recent years, that new journalists may find that hard to believe because it seems that it's become okay sometimes for journalists to let viewers know how they believe? And also newspapers too. The Times was accused many times of being liberal and being, pro-Democrat. How do you instill in new journalists how important it is to be unbiased? And are you afraid that has kind of gone by the wayside?
I think that it's very important, and when I taught at Yale and as I get ready to teach at Harvard, one of the most important things I talk to my students about is the difference between news and opinion, and the fact that at the best news organization there's a line between the two. And I don't, what I worry about is, what I was talking about earlier, that I think the idea of unbiased reporting being just a kind of half and half, this side says one thing, the other side says something else, is not really useful journalism. That doesn't mean I believe in biased reporting. What I believe in is deep reporting, and that if a reporter really digs, there often is what I call a weight of evidence. in stories that are about contentious subjects. And I think if the reporting is there, it's not like you put blinders on and don't report that there's an other side of an argument. But I think it's sort of namby-pambiness to just have sort of equal opportunity quotes on all sides. I worry that there are fewer actual professional reporters out there digging and witnessing, which is what I think strong journalism relies on, and that, you know, in a world that becomes full of first-person blogging and people writing about themselves, that maybe the value of that kind of reporting isn't prized as much as it should be.
And on that note, we're going to close down. And so, thank you.